In this video, I'm going to talk about the materials that you use to do the pargeting. And it's not a simple topic, but I'll try and keep it as straightforward as I possibly can. To start off with, we'll look at the material that actually does the setting, the part that makes it set. And that's based on one of two products. It's either limestone or chalk. Either is fine. That's then processed in the factory by heating it up. And when it heats up, that drives off water and that drives off carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is a part of the air. So just to keep things straightforward, I'll talk about air. So let's say in the factory, it drives off water and it drives off air. That gives you a really dangerous product called quicklime, which does things like eat away at your hands. So before it's given to people to work with, it's then processed again. And the way it's processed, either the air is allowed back, but the water isn't, or the water is allowed back, but the air isn't. And it's sort of this intermediate stage where it's not so dangerous, but it's ready to use and it hasn't set and it hasn't turned back into rock. So here are the two products that you get. In this one, the air has been allowed back, but water hasn't. And in this one, the water has been allowed back, but air hasn't. So let's look at this one first. This is lime putty. Now this is readily available from all lime suppliers. And you can see the water there's plenty of water sitting on top here, which I'll pour off. And because it's got water on top, the air can't get at it. So this is generally bought in a tub this big, and it's full of lime with water on top, and then it's got a sealed top so the air can't get at it, the water can't evaporate, and it can sit like that for years. And it gets better with age, actually, but it never decays, definitely. So if I pour off the water, then that will begin to set because now the air can get at it. It doesn't set very quickly. You've got days, but this is one of the materials that you use for doing pargeting. And if you have a look at it, it's quite a sticky material and very nice to work with. So that's one. Let's put that to one side. The other option is hydrated lime, and this is just a white powder. And in this one, the air has been allowed back and it's powdered, but the water has been kept away from it. And it's important that water stays away from it, so you mustn't let it get damp. You've got to keep it in a sealed bag. Once the bag is opened and air can get to it with moisture in the air, then it starts to decay. So it's not as easy to manage really as this. And part of the trouble with hydrated lime is that its main use is in agriculture and in gardening. People talk about liming the soil. And when they lime the soil, they don't care if any moisture has got to it. So it's quite easy to buy this sort of lime, but you do have to look at the date and make sure it's fresh. Because before I made this video, I went to a builder's merchant and bought some and had a look at the date, and it was 18 months old. I think that's a bit too old. I wouldn't be wanting to use that because it turns itself back into chalk, and chalk doesn't set. It's just a powder. It's a bit like sand. It's a bit like sand. Yeah. Both of these products have been manufactured under 21st century factory conditions, so they're extremely pure. But in the past, they would have been made in a pit in the ground, so they would have been much less pure. And the impurities do have some advantages. So you also get versions of these with impurities or additives, whatever you like to call them. So if I put those to one side and move on to this one, which has got extra silicon in. And it looks remarkably similar to that one. And the name, really annoyingly, is remarkably similar. This is hydrated lime, and this is hydraulic lime. Obviously not names that were invented by marketing people, but they are very different products. This is really pure calcium, and this is calcium with silicon in it. Now you can buy this at builders merchants and lime plaster suppliers too. And it's called hydraulic lime, but usually on the packaging it says NHL, natural hydraulic lime, and you can get NHL2, and 3.5 is very readily available, and 5. And as the numbers increase, it gets harder and it sets quicker. Now, setting quicker is not really an advantage in pargeting because you need plenty of time to do your work. Setting harder doesn't matter if the background is a solid background like a breeze block wall. If you're onto a timber frame building that you're working on, the timber frame has a tendency to move a bit. So it's really not too good an idea to use this sort of product. On a timber frame building, use these ones. But these ones are readily available, especially NHL 3.5. But like hydrated lime, it does go off, so you must buy fresh. But it is available from builders merchants. So stepping up another step, you get cement. There's cement. And cement is also used to do pargeting. So if you were to look at hydrated lime as being NHL 0, and here you've got NHL 2 and 3.5 and 5, cement is somewhere like NHL 20. It's a lot harder and it sets a lot quicker. So if you're going to use cement, you're going to have to put retarders into it. I have to say that I don't work with cement very much at all. So I'm not going to talk about cement because I'm not an expert on that topic. You'll have to investigate that for yourself. Good. So this is the sort of range of active ingredients, the bit of the plaster that does the setting, from pure calcium through to calcium with lots of additives. And a lot of the time, I will tend to work with lime putty. It's readily available from lime plaster suppliers and it keeps forever. NHL 3.5 is readily available from builders merchants, and so long as it's fresh, it's fine for block work. And it's fine for combed and stamped. It's not so good for freehand work. So the next ingredient in the mix is the part that bulks it out, the aggregate. And there are really two options for aggregate. One is chalk, and here we've got a chalk powder, which is powdered chalk dug from the ground. And you should get a fine chalk, and it's available from chalk quarries and lime plaster suppliers in East Anglia, but not generally elsewhere. Chalk is what was traditionally used for lime plastering, perhaps lime pargeting, about 300 years ago in East Anglia. In other parts of the country, it was much more common, and still is more common, to use sand. Sand is the material of choice if you're doing stamped work. Combed can be done in chalk, freehand can be done in chalk, but you need sand for stamped. Unfortunately, the general amount of knowledge in your local builders merchant or even at your local quarry about sand is pretty poor. You're going to have to go and look for yourself. What you need to do is take some of the sand and have a look at it on your hand. What you're looking for is a sand which has the maximum size of the grain is 2 millimeters. And the grains get smaller and smaller and smaller until the smallest ones are dust. So you don't want anything larger than 2 millimeters. And then you sort of run it around. What you also want is a sand which is sharp. It's not round balls that roll around in your hand. You want something that is a little bit hard to move because it's all full of angles. Now, because the advantage of sharp is it packs together well and it will make a nice tight bit of plastering. And the third thing you want is for it to be clean. Now, if you buy it from a builder's merchant, it will be clean. If you buy it from a quarry, it may be clean. Once you've found a sand which works for you, then you can use that one forever and ever. But what you probably don't want is coarse sand or fine sand. One's too fine, one's too coarse. You don't want silver sand. You might want a plastering sand, but check that the grains are small enough. I've been looking at sands around the country, and it seems to me quite often the sort of sand you're looking for is a sand with a local name. Near me in Bedford, there's a sand called Potton sand, and that's just suitable. It's got a nice 2mm to fines grain. It's a sharp sand and it's clean. It's a bright red sand, interestingly. So you'll find something like that near you, I hope. And when you find it, you can just use it forever, but you might have to hunt a little bit to find it. Next ingredient that you have to add, oh yes, and start out by adding by volume 3 parts of sand or chalk to 1 part of hydrated lime or lime putty, and mix that up and see what you get. If you've got lime putty, it's a liquid, so you can just mix the aggregate, this part, in with it straight away. And keep mixing it because you don't want anything too liquid. You're going to have to model with this, so don't add water too quickly. It's very easy to add water later, but it's very difficult to take it away. If you're using hydrated lime, then the whole thing's a powder, so you will have to add some water for sure. And start out with 3 parts of aggregate to 1 part of lime putty. You may need to increase the amount of hydrated lime or lime putty, but do some experiments first and see how it works with your ingredients. So the final ingredient is fibres, and the reason you will put fibres in is because lime or cement and sand or chalk is really strong under compression, but what it's not good at is being strong if it's stretched or if it's twisted. Now, if the background that you're working on to is breeze block, something really solid, then it's not going to move. You're not going to have to suffer from stretch or twist. So you might not bother to put fibre into it, especially if you're doing stamped or combed work. If you're freehand modelling and building up from the surface, then the weight of the plaster will start to stretch it. So yes, you might add some fibre. If you're working onto a timber frame buildings move a little bit, so you definitely want to add fibre. Traditionally, the fibre would have been horsehair, goat hair, cow hair, but these days we use synthetic fibre, and it has lots of advantages. It's readily available from a lime plaster supplier. It's short, it's fine, it's white, it mixes in really easily. If you're working on a timber frame building, then you definitely want to add fibre because the timber can move around over time and the undercoats will have had fibre put in them. The pargeting coat, probably don't want to put so much as the undercoats because you'll end up fighting the fibres as you're trying to model. But add a little and try it out and see how much you can get away with adding, as much as you possibly can, really. For freehand modelling, you can add quite a lot. For combed and stamped work, perhaps not so much. Right, so with those 3 ingredients, the setting part, the aggregate and the hair, you end up with products like this. We've got putty and chalk, which, let's pour off the water so we can see what we've got. There we are. Quite a sticky mix. And then we have putty and chalk with fibre in it. If I pour that off, you can see this. If I pull the thing out, there we are, it's a mat. Let's put it against a dark background so you can sort of see the fibres hanging down. And that is great for doing freehand modelling with. That's a really nice mix, and that's what I'll use for freehand modelling, because when it stiffens up, which this is a little bit sloppy, but when it stiffens up, it's like clay and very nice to work with. And then there's putty and sand. And this is a lot less sticky. And that's much better if you're doing stamped work, because what you really don't want is for your stamp to stick to to the plaster. So you want definitely a sand mix, if you're doing stamped work. Combed work you can do with this or this as well, or this, doesn't matter. So those are all putty mixers, but you could have been using hydrated lime instead. It would be. If you can get a ready mix that's suitable, then that's probably the way to go. I mean, if you're costing your time, then ready mix works out sensible. You don't want to waste your time mixing stuff up. And if you're a beginner, having a good reliable mix that you don't have to put a lot of effort into getting correct is also good. So ready mix is the way to go if you can get something suitable. But most mixers are not really designed for pargeters. There are lime plaster suppliers all over the country, and so I suggest you find your local one and have a chat with them. In my experience, they're very helpful, but outside East Anglia, they might not have heard of pargeting, so you might have to explain to them exactly what you're looking for. Because your typical plasterer will want a coarse mix for undercoats and a fine mix for top coats, and you want something in between. Quite often lime suppliers will talk about a render for outside and a plaster for inside. It's the same thing when it's a lime mix like this. So long it's the size of the grains is much more important than what it's called. You will come across, if I bring back this one, the hydraulic limes, you'll come across hydraulic lime mixers for special purposes. And you should not have any of those, because what you're doing is not the special purposes that they're talking about. You've got your own special purposes. So don't use a specialist hydraulic lime with additives,